having two adults in the classroom in the year 2024 makes sure that you're more likely to have a relationship with one of the adults. You're going to be able to pick up on their learning style better. You're going to be able to communicate with one of them better.
Welcome to the Inclusion Journey podcast, where we have candid conversation about compelling concepts in education. Join this unforgettable inclusion journey as we explore the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Nupur Sethi, the creator and the host of this podcast, former teacher, and a fellow advocate for inclusive classroom and inclusive society. We have kicked off this podcast series talking about co-teaching, where you are getting to hear from those who are implementing co-teaching, such as administrators and teachers, and you'll hear from those who are impacted by co-teaching, parents and students. And I'm really excited to bring to you an influential female leader who has reached significant milestone in implementing co-teaching at a high school site. Courtney has overlooked implementation of co-teaching for the last 3 years. She has even co-taught for 8 years. She has worked with Palo Alto Unified School District for the last 13 years. Let's dive in together into conversation with Courtney to learn and be inspired by her co-teaching journey. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Can you tell us, the viewers, what is co-teaching according to you?
I think co-teaching to me is best described as equity in action. The idea of co-teaching is structured around the idea that any student, regardless of ability level, should have access to grade level curriculum through a partnership of delivery by a general education teacher and an education specialist. And what's more equitable than making sure everyone has access?
When was the first time you heard about co-teaching?
So I've been lucky enough to be in education for around 13 years. And I actually first heard about co-teaching when I was an instructional education aide in the special ed department at a high school, and they were piloting one section of co-teaching in world history in order to start the gradual move away from separate setting classes to provide more access for students.
Mm-hmm. And co-teaching is a really old concept, but it's not very commonly heard of, right? And not implemented.
And I've actually heard that differs across the country. There are different states who've embraced it more. Texas, for example, has a whole guide on how to do it, and it is their main method of delivery. So I think California is still trying to catch up to some of the other states.
And obviously, you are one of those leaders who are leading the way into making it more normalizing it, right? It's just one standard teaching or one person teaching. So you have co-taught yourself for 8 years, and now as an administrator, when you think back for 3 years ago, what were your first steps to implement co-teaching?
So I was lucky enough to be at a school that already had an established model. But we did hire a new batch of special ed teachers when I came into the administrative role. And so I had to be really thoughtful about providing time for relationships to cultivate. And so a few steps I took was I provided time for new pairs in the summer to get to know each other and build that trust and that relationship and to be able to share a classroom together. And then throughout the school year, I really nurtured those relationships. So I did quarterly check-ins with each of the co-teaching pairs, which provided them a space to have a moderated conversation, which is really where hard topics can come up. A lot of the times when you're sharing a classroom day-to-day with someone, you don't want to say, hey, that really bothered me, because you have to be together for the next 2 hours. So you're not going to bring that up and then just jump into working together. So I think making sure they had someone who could moderate a conversation, be a sounding board, give them ideas from an outside neutral perspective was really helpful, because co-teaching at the end of the day is really about the relationship between the two adults in the room, and making sure there's trust and communication and support of all the students.
What was the summer then look like for the teachers when you mentioned that you spend time building in the summer? Like, were there activity plans? Like, as an administrator,
Yeah, so we usually hold a summer training before the start of the school year. And I have some guided activities that they engage with around setting norms for the classroom. So they go over roles, responsibilities, they do get to know you activities. It's about spending intentional time together. And then often in the summer, I'll also provide stipended time for some co-planning because it's really nice, especially for the education specialist, to go into the school year with the first 2 weeks planned with the gen ed teacher, because there's so much to do in the other parts of their role with supporting special ed kids at the start of the school year, or students in special ed because they're students first.
yeah. Do you also have them have hard conversations? Like you talked about, just clear, explicit, like what's your role? What would be your role? Who would be emailing the parents? Like you have all of that conversation, like proactively plan?
Proactively before the start of the school year. And then that first quarter check-in as the administrator with the pair is going back to those agreements that have been set and being like, how is this one working? Do we need to pivot? Is this actually happening? Are we actually doing this? And taking the time to purposefully reflect all together as a small group.
Okay. So UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and co-teaching together is supposed to be a perfect blend. Like I was thinking of coffee, perfect blend. Did you start with UDL and co-teaching? Or if you did, was it an easy transition to do both? We heard that yesterday in a conversation that came up. Right, whether, I don't know whether we are doing UDL along with co-teaching. Looks like we need training. Like, what was it an easy transition if you did both UDL and co-teaching?
Well, I actually think that a lot of people could use the concepts of UDL to their advantage when it comes to co-teaching and co-planning. So another aspect as an administrator is for quarter 2 check-in, I go to a planning session and watch how a pair plans. And I think a flaw sometimes, or a misstep, is that the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher will try to sit down and plan the whole lesson step by step together. But really they should be playing to their strengths. So the general education teacher is the content specialist, and the education specialist is the access specialist. And so I think a lot of the times what pairs should be doing is taking a content lesson that's already been prepared and then going through it with a universal design for learning template and going through the steps of the lesson plan and making sure they're bringing that lens to what they're doing. Because that really provides an opportunity for the education specialist to show what they know and look at an activity and be like, well, did we think about this part? Did we think about that part? Can we pivot here? Can we pivot there?
And even though teachers might not know what is universal design for learning, it can also be naturally based on what were the strengths, as you said, of the teacher. Like if the teacher has the strength of doing, offering more options of representation of the content in a kinesthetic way, or, offering podcasts, like she has a database of offering podcasts for students to listen to a content. It can naturally be sometimes we, as a teachers, we feel that UDL is such a big framework to learn, but you naturally could organically be doing that as your strengths, right? Offering when it comes to planning.
Yeah, that's definitely how I see it. I also think co-teaching really lends itself to being able to provide that differentiation and assessments, because you have 2 adults in the room who can assess in different ways for different students.
And what is so there are 6 models of co-teaching. Like when you have the journey of when you start co-teaching, or even as a teacher yourself, do you start with, which model did you start with?
So I think what's funny when I think about my own relationship that I had with co-teaching, I taught with the same person for 8 school years. And when I first started, I was a first-year teacher, and they were a very, very experienced teacher because they had actually been teaching since the year I was born. And so a lot of the times you may think that's going to be a recipe for disaster. There's no way that this older, more experienced teacher is going to be able to handle having a younger teacher in the room or be comfortable with that. but it actually really worked, and I learned as much from her as she learned from me. And I think part of that was because we weren't afraid to try out the models, because we weren't afraid to interrupt each other. And a lot of the times interrupting can come off as like rude, or people can feel uncomfortable about it. But, you know, we'd start the day off, and it was really important to my co-teacher that the classroom was authentically owned by both of us. And she was like, the only way it's going to be authentically owned by both of us is if you're up front just as much as I am. So when we're going in and out of the models, I'm totally fine if it's both of us at the front of the room talking back and forth and having a conversation. And if you want to introduce this part of the lesson, or you want to share, you know, this physics topic, I will just interrupt if you forget something. And I think that also created an environment for students that was actually really comfortable, because I would mess up in front of them, and that was okay. Which then made it so they felt like they could ask more questions, they could mess up, they could take risks, because everyone in the classroom was trying something new.
Yeah. I like how you said authentically own the space.
Yeah.
As both of them belong in this classroom, this is their space. They authentically, you know, are responsible for this, all students.
And I think a lot of the times new pairs can feel really uncomfortable with sharing that space, because teaching is a type of career that takes a lot of ego, and people have big egos, and you got to be able to share the space. And so advice I always give to new pairs who are feeling uncomfortable about being up front, especially with content type of stuff, is you can go through the lesson and intentionally pick out parts that you can do to make sure you each have face time. So for example, we would do a lab in conceptual physics in my first, you know, year or two. And I may not know all the ins and outs of the labs, but I can sure as, you know, heck, get them verbally set up. So I can be at the front of the room and be like, here are your groupings. Here are the roles you're being assigned. Here are the first tasks you're going to start with. And I think people don't understand how powerful it is even just to be at the front of the room giving directions. So I think a lot of the times it's like, oh, I can only be at the front of the room if I can do the whole lesson, but it should really be that back and forth energy and relationship between the two teachers.
And you rightly pointed out, teaching is such an individualistic career. Like, you know, you individually, you have big classroom, your own space. Do you think it'll be great for incoming teachers to just, like the teachers who are educators in becoming, to have that it is co-teaching from get-go, right? You know, because that's...
I actually think it's more helpful to start just with new teachers, because then that's what they get used to. So I think it is beneficial to have new teachers. I also think teacher education programs are changing, you know, post-pandemic, and they're having to figure out different models to present of what teaching can look like, because now we don't know where the world's going to go. No one expected us to go all online, and that had to allow for a lot of creativity in that space. And so I think programs are pivoting to make sure there are more options for creativity moving forward, because we're also dealing with students coming back and having different types of behaviors and different types of needs and needing more hands-on learning.
Yeah. So you kind of went on I want to know about the barrier, because everybody we talk about co-teaching, and especially at a high school level, like, you know, how do you co-teach, and what are the barriers and hurdles that come at a high school site, and how did you overcome those?
So I think at every site, regardless of age level, time can be a barrier. So you have to start with the universal schedule. That's what we personally call the master schedule now. We feel master is an outdated term, so we're using universal schedule. But you should set everything related to your co-teaching program first before you set anything else. And that guarantees that the special ed teacher and the gen ed teacher who are working together can have a shared common prep. So they have time built in the schedule to be able to plan. Additionally, it's really about making sure that special ed and the educational specialist are embraced in the whole school culture and engaged in the whole school culture. So in order to kind of go after that time barrier, we also made sure that our special education teachers were part of the general education PLCs. And so they spent that planning time as well. And then another barrier would just be that relationship piece. It can be really hard for humans to get along with each other. And I think that's why you really have to spend the time making sure you have intentional conversations before you start.
I love how you talked about proactively thinking about including the special ed teacher. I mean, when I think about my own teaching career, like even in the staff meeting, the special ed teacher would be there. I mean, even in the structure in the school, the special ed is at the back of the, so just bringing all of them in forefront and proactively planning from get-go, from the universal schedule you have. I remember seeing that in your staff lounge, the universal schedule. It's a great way to.
Well, and I actually think, the longer we choose to have special education segregated in any shape or form, the harder it's going to be to evolve in education. Because right now, if you look at what's coming out, there's a lot of stuff around response to intervention, multi-tiered systems of supports, universal design for learning, and really the best people to lead a lot of that work and to almost prevent students from going into special ed earlier on are education specialists who have that background and that special ed training. Like, they should be a part of everything you're doing instructionally at a school site. And I often think they're not brought to the table. But if you're talking about building a multi-tiered systems of support and having different tiers, using different universal assessments, figuring out ways to get information about students and get them short-term interventions, your biggest partners should be your staff with special education training and background.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have so much knowledge that not only would help just a special need kid, would help the entire.
Yeah.
Right? Because they have worked with they have overcome some barriers, right? They have overcome some reading, student having reading issues, reading challenges. They've looked at there's such expertise of that, and that can help everybody.
Well, and that's something I would argue too is co-teaching does benefit everyone. And in our first few years of having all our core subjects co-taught, we did get a lot of questions from parents of general education students being like, is this watered down curriculum? Is this not going to help my student? But actually, when students are exposed and able to learn in heterogeneous groups, that benefits them. Additionally, having 2 adults in the classroom in the year 2024 makes sure that you're more likely to have a relationship with one of the adults. You're going to be able to pick up on their learning style better. You're going to be able to communicate with one of them better. So I really think co-teaching benefits everybody, regardless of your background, whether you're in general education, you're an English language learner, you have a 504, or you have an IEP. I think just that access to 2 adults delivering curriculum in different models and modes is great.
And this is also breaking the myth. It's really wonderful to hear that, because to bring special education specialists and special ed teacher up front in the limelight, because it's also breaking the myth of the expectations that we have from the special needs students, right? Because when you have a lower expectations, you don't want to do anything, right? You don't want to. That special ed teacher is for them, right? Because we don't have any high expectations.
Well, and everybody, no matter what, needs access to grade level curriculum. You're never going to be able to close your gaps as a student if you're not being exposed to grade level curriculum. And that's the other powerful thing about co-teaching, is it ensures everyone is getting access to grade level curriculum.
What about the IP minutes, Courtney, in your co-taught class? How does that happen?
Yeah, so we currently do code them as specialized academic instruction within the general education classroom. And we are going to continue to do that and continue to refine the service that's being provided in the co-taught setting. And we're even going to start looking into the idea of eliminating or reducing separate setting specialized academic instruction courses. So right now we do have different students who end up being in at least one separate setting class for all 4 years. But we really want to be intentional about skill building and figure out ways to help those students build those skills and keep growing in a short-term specialized academic instruction setting that's separate class. and then have it reinforced by building some of those instructional strategies and tier 1 supports into the general education classrooms they're in, and looking more at specialized academic instruction time that's separate outside of the gen ed setting, really being those check-ins happening with the case manager, being able to prioritize, reflect on goals, rather than always having to be the separate setting. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does. And I know the answer for this one because we had a chance to meet yesterday and surprisingly run into each other, and you shared this. But we talked about the barrier. Now, how about the benefit? And you shared a big statistic about the benefit of co-teaching yesterday. And if you can share with our listeners and viewers about what does the data says about co-teaching?
Happy to. So in the 2016-2017 school year, we were lucky enough to expand our co-teaching courses into all the core graduation subjects for English, math, science, and social studies. And so in 2016-2017, in that first year, right before we did the big expand, we had about 68% of our students in special education with mild to moderate disabilities graduate A through G, or 4-year college ready. So 68%, 2016-2017. Now for last school year, 2022-2023. Yes. We are at 87% of students in special education with a mild to moderate disability graduating A through G or 4-year college ready. And those are students who previously would have been in separate setting courses and not included in the general education setting. But we are being able to prove that if you provide access, they will succeed and they will benefit and they will grow. So I'm only hoping that number goes up.
Yeah. That's a big leap. That's a big success.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest to an administrator who's listening to this conversation and want to try co-teaching? What would you say to him, her, or them for getting on this co-teaching journey?
So I think it's okay to start small. I do think it's best to start with English and math. And I think it's best to have some organic conversations with staff, figure out who may be interested. A lot of the times as a site administrator, you already know which ones of your teachers are more flexible, more willing to take risks. And so I think building momentum, in conversations throughout a school year, and then really in January and February, as you start to build your universal schedule, designating which courses you'd like to pilot co-teaching in, and then being prepared to spend resources. I also know it's really powerful to go see it in action for anyone who might be a non-believer out the gate. So at my school, I host people all the time to come into the classrooms and see what it looks like, because I think when you just read about it, especially if you've been in education for a long time, it can be hard to imagine it working. But then you can come by my site or other sites that I know of in the area, and you can step into a classroom and have no idea who the general education teacher is or who the education specialist is. You won't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah, that happened with me when I was at your site. And then I asked one of the teachers, are you general ed, special ed? So it is, you have to visit. So we're on the last question, and I call it the speedy short answer round. Okay. And since the theme of this podcast is really journey, and the idea being journey is there is clear no destination. Right? We are just continuously evolving. So the question is journey based. So number one is, can you recall a time when you embark on a journey with no clear destination, and what did you discover?
I think my educational career, I had no clear journey. I actually really immensely struggled in high school. And if you had talked to me in 9th grade now, I'd have no idea I'd be sitting here. But I have always been really outspoken. And so along my journey, I asked questions. I asked what other options there were for a lot of different paths. I didn't end up finishing a traditional high school. I did a middle college program at a community college. So I I purposely sought out a different path, but it was definitely a journey. I didn't know where I was going to end up.
Sounds like from your response that when not having a destination, it actually helps you evolve even better, right? Because you're going to try different options. And that's what is standing out to me from your conversation and our conversation we had just yesterday is like trying, like giving it a try, like not. Because when you have, not destination, you're going to try different options to see what path you want to go on. Yeah. Okay, number 2, if you're about to set off on a spontaneous journey, what are some 3 things you're going to take with you?
3 things I would take with me would be my phone, my water bottle, and sunblock.
Okay. You're clearly heading to the beach.
I'm a big walker, and so I find the most authentic way to explore any place is to walk around, and you need your phone, your water bottle, and your sunblock.
Yeah. Right, number 3, education is an adventure. What would be your ultimate quest for knowledge?
My ultimate quest for knowledge is how to make sure every student has access while also having the most fun possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I have one last thing to say,
Yes,
by the way.
please do.
I think another thing I'd like to just say to administrators who are interested in taking a risk with co-teaching is it's really about sustained buy-in. So even if you don't see the benefits after the first year, because it is really hard, make a commitment, make a 3-year commitment, and you will see benefits. So stay committed, even if it's not happening as quickly as you'd like it to. I just thought about that and didn't want to forget it.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you interfered because I was going to do my outro right now, but I'm glad you interfered. It's like a co-design, right? Talked about in co-teaching, you have to be able to know. And that's an important point because it's ready to give up, right? You have to stick with it, get professional to support them, support the staff and sustain it and commit and buy in.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we wrap up our 2nd episode of the Inclusion Journey podcast, I want to express my gratitude to Courtney and to all our listeners and the community that I hope to create through this podcast. Next month, you're going to hear from 2 teachers, a general ed and a special ed teacher who have been on this journey for quite some time. You don't want to miss that episode. Thank you for joining me on the Inclusion Journey podcast. Join us each month from June through October to get insight, ideas, and inspiration. Please email us for topic, comments, or any suggestion that you have at inclusion@seccoe.org. Thank you, Courtney.